Hi, for today's writing lesson, we're going to be talking about burying transitions. Now, transitions are words or phrases that help us guide through or organize our writing. They can be obvious or familiar words that are easy to see, and sometimes transitions work really well at the beginning of a sentence, but other times it'll sound better if you bury it or place it a little bit later in the sentence. This can make your sentences more complicated, and it can mix up your sentence structure, which makes it more interesting to read. And so also another thing you should know is that we should choose transitions to fit our purpose or audience. So we often choose transitions like first, next, then, last when we're trying to use the purpose of telling our audience how to do something or the steps that need to be done, right? But if we're writing a story, we would more so use transitions like the next day or just a few moments later, which kind of just move time forward or backward in our story. All right, so let's look at how we can use these more complicated transition types to make our sentences and our writing stronger. So on the obvious side, for example one, they're doing what I kind of just talked about. They're giving the steps in which something needs to happen, and there's a specific order that these things are supposed to happen in. So they're using the transitions first. So let's see that one. We see first workers level out the new roadway, right? Okay, then if I look though at the other side, on the right side in the buried transition example, see where it says workers first level out the roadway when they make a new road. So they use that same exact transition here first. Oops. They use that same transition here first, but instead of just using it right at the beginning of the sentence, they've kind of snuck it in the sentence later. And they do the same thing for the rest of them. Let's look at that. Second, machines pound the dirt to make it hard and stable. Okay, so they're telling us the second step, right? Let's see where we find that information about it being the second step in the buried transition. Pounding the dirt to make it hard and stable is the second step. All right, so there we go. We've got first step, second step, and we're burying these transitions. All right, now the next sentence says third, gravel and paving are added to form a hard surface. Okay, so we were looking for that transition third. Gravel and paving are added as the third step to form a hard surface. So see how they were just being very sneaky. They're really using the same words. It's not really anything more complicated as far as the vocabulary, but they just kind of tried to say it a little differently instead of using it in the introduction of their sentence, right? So let's see if we could do that here in example 2. They're not giving us the buried transitions. We have to come up with them. So I'm going to do that here. So one example of a landform that rivers make is a delta. So clearly the transition that they're using, actually I should go back to my pen here. Clearly the transition that they're using is they're giving an example. So they're using this transition, one example, right? One example. Okay, so if they're giving us that one example, if they're giving us an example of something, what are they giving us an example of? One example of a landform that rivers make is a delta. Oh, okay. So then I could say a delta is one example of a landform that rivers make, right? Okay, that makes sense. Now, obviously, this paragraph is describing different landforms that can be made by rivers. That's cool. So let's take a look at the next sentence for the same example. The next sentence says, another example is a canyon. Okay, my transition here is another example. It tells my reader that I'm getting ready to give you another example of what I'm talking about. So now let's come on this side and let's think, how can we say that in a way that is different than just saying another example at the beginning? Well, we could do just what we did above, right? We could say what the example is and then tell them that that's another one. So a canyon, oops, didn't need to be capitalized there. A canyon is another example of, or you could just even stop it there, another example. But if I didn't have the sentence above, I would probably be very descriptive and I would say, a canyon is another example of a landform that can be made. by a river, right? Okay, let's look at the next one. I'm sorry about this watermark here at the bottom of my page. Let's see if I can extend my page and kind of be sneaky about getting rid of it. There we go. Okay, example number 3 for our last example. It says, first gather the ingredients you need for the cake. Okay, so now we're kind of going back to that beginning one where we're giving steps again. So first is the transition they want us to use. So if I think back to the way that they did it, they buried the transition. So I could say, you need to gather the ingredients for the cake first. Okay, and then let's take a look at this last one here. Next, measure each ingredient with a measuring cup or spoon. Okay, so next is my transition they want me to use. And so for that, I might say something like, you will need to measure each ingredient next, right? Okay, so now hopefully you got a good idea of how you can bury transitions. So what I want you to do now is go back to your own writing. Make sure that you have transitions. And if you have them all at the beginning, see if you can find a couple of places to bury your transitions. And now so you can make your writing a little bit more complicated. All right, thank you. Hope you enjoyed today's lesson.